They thought humiliating her would put her in her place. Instead, Danielle Hayes walked away, taking $900 million and the bank's reputation with her. Danielle Hayes walked into the chandelier-lit boardroom of Westbridge Bank, her presence commanding even before she spoke. The opulent space was designed to impress, walls painted in muted blues, chandeliers dripping with crystal, and a long polished mahogany table that stretched the length of the room. Executives in tailored suits sat stiffly around it, their eyes narrowing as she entered. The sound of her heels echoed softly against the marble floor, each step deliberate, steady, unapologetic. Her orange dress, bold and striking, seemed to unsettle them further. It wasn't the muted navy or black they were used to in these halls. It was a statement, as vivid as the woman wearing it. Danielle placed her leather portfolio on the table with quiet confidence, smoothing its cover before sliding it toward the center. Inside were documents worth more than any single individual in that room could imagine. $900 million ready to be invested through Hayes Capital, the powerhouse she had built with nothing but grit, vision, and unshakable discipline. But before she could open her mouth, the murmurs began. It started as a low ripple, men leaning toward one another, women exchanging doubtful glances. One whispered, "She must be lost." Another muttered, "Who invited her here?" Their doubt wasn't about the deal. It was about her. The polished boardroom, the marble, the chandeliers, the suits, it all whispered one message: "You don't belong." The tension broke with a sharp voice from the far end of the table. "Who let her in here?" Every head turned as Victoria Crane rose slightly from her chair, her red gown catching the light. Where Danielle's presence radiated calm authority, Victoria's bristled with hostility. As vice president of the bank, Victoria was known for her ruthless efficiency and her sharp tongue. But this was different. This wasn't business. It was personal. She pointed directly at Danielle, her manicured finger cutting across the room like a blade. "She doesn't belong here." The words dropped heavy in the room. Danielle's expression didn't shift. She did not flinch, did not frown. Instead, she calmly slid her identification across the table, her voice even, controlled. "I believe you received my documents," she said. The subtle weight in her tone demanded attention, though she spoke no louder than necessary. Victoria barely glanced at the ID. Her lips curled into a sneer, eyes glinting with disbelief and something sharper, contempt. "This is a fraud," she declared. "Do you really expect us to believe you?" She stretched the word out, letting the venom drip. "Are here to invest $900 million?" Gasps broke through the silence. Some executives looked at each other, uneasy. One young analyst lowered his eyes to the table, as if ashamed to be part of what was unfolding. Others leaned forward, curiosity in their gaze, their phones hovering discreetly at their sides, ready to record. Danielle remained composed, her silence louder than any rebuttal could have been. She had seen this before, the disbelief, the arrogance, the rush to erase her presence. But what they did not understand was that her power was not in reacting. Her power was in waiting. Victoria, emboldened by Danielle's calm, snapped her fingers. The sound echoed in the ornate room, a sound of authority misused. Two security guards stepped forward almost instantly, their suits as crisp as their movements were rough. They didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. One reached for Danielle's arm, gripping tightly. The other seized her collar, yanking it as though pulling an intruder off private property. The suddenness of it jolted the room. Chairs scraped against the floor. One executive gasped audibly, hand flying to her mouth. A man at the far end pulled out his phone in the open now, no longer hiding the fact that he was recording. The optics of what was happening were undeniable. In a boardroom meant for deals and diplomacy, A black woman in a striking orange dress was being manhandled as if she were an imposter. "Remove her," Victoria ordered, her voice cold, clipped, merciless. Danielle's body tilted forward as the guards pulled, but she steadied herself against the polished table, her palm pressing into the smooth wood. For the first time, she spoke, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable weight. "You're making a mistake." The words seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the chaos. Even the guards hesitated for half a breath, but Victoria only scoffed, leaning forward with a cruel smile. "A mistake? The only mistake here is you thinking you could walk into this bank and play executive. Take her out." The guards tightened their grip, but Danielle did not resist. Her stillness unnerved them, as though she knew something they did not. Around the room, eyes widened, whispers grew, and cameras captured every second. Some faces revealed shame, others curiosity, and a few, though silent, showed the flicker of recognition, as if they realized who she truly was. Danielle did not shout. She did not plead. She allowed herself to be dragged toward the door, every step deliberate, every movement a silent declaration. Because while Victoria Crane thought she was removing an imposter, what she was really doing was orchestrating the most public undoing of her own career. And Danielle Hayes, calm as ever, knew it. Danielle's heels scraped against the marble floor as the guards forced her backward, their grips firm and unyielding. She steadied herself with one hand against the edge of the table, the polished surface cool beneath her palm, while her other hand clutched the strap of her portfolio, unwilling to let it go. Around her, the boardroom dissolved into a theater of stunned silence, punctuated by the soft beeps and clicks of smartphones being raised, recording every second. Faces she had once seen smiling in glossy magazines now looked away, either too afraid or too complicit to intervene. The quiet judgment in their eyes stung more than the physical pull of the guards. "You're making a mistake," Danielle said, her tone steady, not raised, not desperate, just grounded. Her voice carried an authority that contrasted sharply with the absurdity of the scene, forcing several heads to turn back toward her. Victoria Crane laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that bounced off the chandelier-lit ceiling. "A mistake," she repeated, mocking the very idea. Her crimson gown caught the light, its brilliance a calculated contrast to Danielle's bold orange dress. "No, the mistake is you thinking you could stroll in here and pretend you belong. Do you really think this boardroom is open to imposters? Take her out." The guard closest to Danielle tightened his grip, fingers digging into her collar. His face was impassive, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. "Ma'am, you need to leave now," he muttered, his voice clipped with forced authority. Danielle turned her head, slow and deliberate, until her gaze met his. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath. "When this moment ends," she said, her voice dropping to a velvet calm that somehow carried more weight than a shout, "I want you to remember you put your hands on the wrong woman." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Executives exchanged uneasy glances. A junior analyst at the far end, barely older than 25, shifted forward in his chair, brow furrowed. His voice was barely audible, but carried just enough to stir the silence. "She's not lying. I've seen her name before." Victoria's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but she recovered quickly, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Don't be ridiculous. She's bluffing. Just a desperate woman trying to scam her way into our ranks." But the certainty in Danielle's voice, the steadiness in her stance despite being dragged, was starting to crack the illusion Victoria worked so hard to build. The guards, however, were not hired to think. They tugged her toward the door, ignoring the whispers that swelled like ripples in water. The leather of Danielle's portfolio brushed against the leg of a chair, drawing eyes to it. The embossed logo of Hayes Capital gleamed faintly under the room's golden lights. Some recognized it instantly, though they didn't yet speak up. The silence in the boardroom grew thick, broken only by the shuffling of Danielle's shoes against the polished floor and the faint gasps of assistants whose phones were still recording. A few executives leaned in to whisper to one another, torn between disbelief and dawning recognition. The narrative Victoria tried to spin, a fraud, an outsider, was already crumbling under its own weight. Danielle kept her eyes forward, not on Victoria, not on the men forcing her out, but on the gleaming double doors at the end of the room. She knew this humiliation was temporary, a performance Victoria had orchestrated to assert dominance. But Victoria had underestimated one critical thing. Every second was being documented, every sneer, every order, every word. The truth would not need Danielle to defend it. It was already captured. Victoria, blind to her own unraveling, leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug tilt of her chin. She thought she had dismantled Danielle's presence, reduced her to nothing more than a spectacle. She thought this boardroom would remember Danielle as a woman who was thrown out, not as one who came with $900 million of power behind her. But Danielle understood something Victoria didn't, that humiliation is only power if it sticks, and tonight, the stain would not be on her. It would be on the woman in red, the one who dismissed her without so much as glancing at the documents in front of her. As the guards pulled Danielle closer to the door, a final murmur cut through the tension. "Hayes Capital," someone whispered aloud, finally giving voice to the recognition others were too afraid to confirm. The words hung in the air like a spark, ready to ignite. Victoria didn't notice it yet, but Danielle did. And beneath the calm, her lips curved into the faintest, knowing smile. This wasn't the end of her presence in Westbridge Bank's boardroom. It was only the beginning of Victoria Crane's downfall. Would you like me to continue this moment directly into the reversal, where the truth about Danielle explodes in Victoria's face, or keep expanding the humiliation scene longer before the tables turn? Danielle straightened the edge of her blazer, smoothing the wrinkle where the guard's hand had gripped too roughly. Her movements were deliberate, steady, as though reclaiming every ounce of dignity they had tried to strip from her. The lobby buzzed with hushed whispers, the tension so sharp it seemed to press against the glass walls. She didn't raise her voice, didn't plead her case, didn't waste breath on outrage. Instead, she slipped her phone from her pocket with the same grace she would use to sign a billion-dollar deal. Her thumb tapped a single contact, and when the line clicked open, she spoke 3 simple words, calm, clear, and final. "Activate the protocol." She ended the call before any reply could come. The sound of the phone sliding back into her pocket was the only punctuation she allowed. A few of the witnesses blinked in confusion, unsure what she meant. Some of the junior staff standing near the security desk exchanged nervous glances. The guards, still looming beside her, dismissed it as some meaningless bluff. But within moments, they would learn how wrong they were. Inside the boardroom above, chaos began to ripple like a fast-moving current. The screens mounted along the walls flickered, the bank's glossy presentations dissolving into breaking headlines, pulled from live feeds. Executives who moments ago had smirked or stayed silent while Danielle was dragged out of the room now stared wide-eyed at their devices. News outlets across the globe were flashing the same story in bold letters. Black investor dragged from bank in shocking scene. The hashtags multiplied by the second. Hashtag Danielle Hayes and hashtag bank scandal trended on social platforms as videos uploaded by staff and guests exploded across the internet. Clips of Danielle's calm warning, her words to the guard about putting his hands on the wrong woman, played on repeat. In less than 5 minutes, the narrative had slipped entirely out of the bank's control. Executives scrambled, voices overlapping in panic. Get legal on the phone. Shut this down before it spreads further. How do we spin this? But each refresh of their feeds brought worse news. Commentators, activists, and even rival banks were weighing in, condemning what they had just witnessed. The bank's reputation, carefully crafted over decades, was unraveling in real time. Down in the lobby, Danielle stood motionless, her posture sharp, her expression composed. Around her, the security guards shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence dissolving as they noticed the change in atmosphere. Employees who had initially gawked at the spectacle were now lifting their phones higher, angling for clearer shots. Some wore looks of regret, realizing they had just become complicit in a scandal that would stain the company for years. The glass doors at the entrance burst open with a violent swing, and Richard Palmer, the bank CEO, stormed inside. His suit jacket was half-buttoned, his tie slightly askew, a detail that spoke volumes about how quickly he had abandoned whatever engagement he'd been at. His face was red, not from anger alone, but from the rush across town, from knowing that every second lost meant the story spreading further, faster, deeper into the public consciousness. "What the hell is going on here?" he barked, his voice cutting across the stunned silence of the lobby. His gaze swept over the crowd, the phones, the guards, the hushed whispers, and then it landed on her. He froze mid-step. The fire in his tone evaporated, leaving only recognition. His lips parted, but for once in his polished career, words failed him. There she stood, in the exact center of the lobby, her head lifted, her gaze unflinching, a storm of power contained within the stillness of her frame. Every phone in the room pivoted toward her, capturing the moment as though it had been scripted for history. Danielle slowly turned, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that felt more dangerous than fury. "Ms. Hayes," his voice cracked. His chest rose and fell as if he'd been struck. "You're Danielle Hayes," she said, finishing for him, her tone steady, authoritative, final. "CEO of Hayes Capital." The name landed like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the crowd, spreading from one corner of the lobby to the other. Hayes Capital, one of the most influential private equity firms in the country, the same firm rumored to be weighing partnerships with global banks. Her name had been whispered in circles of wealth and power, sometimes dismissed by skeptics, often respected by those who knew better. And now here she was, standing in their lobby, not as a supplicant, but as the very investor who could decide the fate of their institution. The color drained from Richard Palmer's face, his jaw working soundlessly. The guards at Danielle's side released her instantly, their hands snapping back as though burned by fire. They had touched a woman whose signature could move billions. The realization came too late. Cameras captured the recoil, freezing the evidence of their miscalculation in 1,000 angles. Around them, the silence was deafening. The hierarchy had shifted. The so-called intruder was not a trespasser, but a titan. And the bank, in its arrogance, had just declared war on the wrong woman. Would you like me to expand the next scene, where Danielle turns the humiliation into leverage against Victoria and Richard, into another 700 words too? Richard's hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly as if the simple act of reaching toward her might undo the damage already done. His voice cracked as he tried to summon authority. "Ms. Hayes, please, you must understand. This is not who we are. This is not who I am. My people, they acted rashly. Give us a chance to make this right." Danielle's expression never shifted. Her calm was sharper than any raised voice could have been. She let the weight of his words hang in the air, and when she finally spoke, her tone carried the steady precision of someone who had endured this kind of moment too many times before. "You want me to believe this isn't who you are?" she asked softly, almost like she was speaking to herself. "But I walked into your bank with nearly $1 billion prepared to move, and your people saw me as a criminal. Not a client, not a partner, a threat. That doesn't happen by accident, Mr. Palmer. That happens because the culture allows it." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared at their phones, pretending to scroll, but clearly reading the wildfire of headlines already tearing through the financial world. Investor assaulted at global bank headquarters. Hayes Capital CEO humiliated before investment meeting. The damage wasn't theoretical anymore. It was global, irreversible, live-streamed to millions. Richard tried to gather himself, straightening his tie like it might somehow reassemble his dignity. "You're right. You're absolutely right. But Danielle, Ms. Hayes, please allow me to fix this. Allow me to prove this institution is bigger than one mistake." Danielle closed her case slowly, her fingers deliberate, almost ceremonial. The click of the latch sounded final, like a gavel striking in a courtroom. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. Every move reinforced who truly held control of the room. "Fix this," she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "Do you understand what nearly happened today? Had I not pressed a number on my phone, had witnesses not filmed, this story would be very different. The world would not be seeing your panic right now. They would be seeing my mugshot." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. He glanced toward Victoria, his vice president, perhaps hoping she might save him. But the woman sat frozen, her earlier arrogance dissolved into a pale mask of fear. Danielle's gaze slid toward her, cutting like a blade. "And your words will be replayed for weeks. Fraud, fake, doesn't belong here. You've etched those into the history of this bank, protecting it." She shook her head, just once. "No, you poisoned it." Victoria looked like she wanted to vanish into the leather of her chair. Danielle turned her attention back to the entire room, her voice carrying a measured power. "I don't need Hayes Capital to invest here. There are 100 institutions in this city alone who would fight for what you just lost. I came to this table because I thought you were different. I thought maybe, finally, a deal could be made without suspicion shadowing every step I take. Clearly, I was wrong." She picked up her portfolio, slipping it neatly under her arm, and adjusted her blazer as if to mark the moment complete. The executives, who only an hour ago believed they were entertaining a mere investor, now looked like schoolchildren awaiting a verdict. Richard tried once more, his voice breaking into desperation. "Ms. Hayes, please, if you walk out that door." She cut him off with a single look, calm but unyielding. "If I walk out that door, Mr. Palmer, the world will already know why. And unlike your people today, I don't need to raise my voice or force my way through. The truth has already done the work for me." Her heels clicked against the floor again as she moved toward the door, every step echoing with finality. Security had melted back against the walls, no longer daring to meet her eyes. The staff who had gathered in the lobby earlier still lingered, some recording, others whispering, all bearing witness to the unraveling of power before them. At the threshold, Danielle paused, turning just enough to meet Richard's eyes one last time. "Hayes Capital does not invest in arrogance. We do not invest in prejudice. And we do not invest in men who only find their conscience when cameras are rolling. Consider this deal terminated." The door opened with a soft hiss, and then it closed behind her, leaving Richard Palmer standing in the center of a collapsing empire, his outstretched hand still hanging useless in the air. The boardroom, once his arena, now felt like a cage closing in. Phones continued to buzz, screens lit with headlines, and every executive in the room understood the truth. Danielle Hayes hadn't just walked out with her money. She had walked out with their reputation, their credibility, and perhaps their future. And none of them would ever forget the sound of her heels fading down that marble corridor. By the time nightfall spread its shadow across the city, Danielle Hayes' story had escaped the marble walls of Westbridge Bank and exploded across every screen in America. News anchors spoke her name with a mix of awe and disbelief, as if they could hardly believe the footage they were replaying. Headlines screamed from digital banners and television tickers. Black CEO humiliated at Westbridge Bank. Pulls $900 million investment. The moment captured on video. Her calm yet cutting words, the sharp snap of her case closing, and her final dismissal of Richard Palmer had already been shared millions of times. Clips circulated on social media in countless variations, slowed down for emphasis, captioned with bold statements like "dignity over dollars," and "this is what power looks like." People debated every detail, from the tone in Danielle's voice to the stunned expressions of the executives who had watched their empire collapse in real time. One clip in particular gained massive traction. The security guards dragging Danielle toward the doors, followed by the seamless cut to her return, standing tall and dismantling the bank's authority with nothing but words. The juxtaposition was too powerful to ignore, and the internet crowned her a symbol of grace and defiance in the face of institutional arrogance. Public outrage came in waves, crashing harder by the hour. By midnight, branches of Westbridge Bank across the country saw long lines, not of eager customers, but of people demanding to close their accounts. The withdrawals hit the institution like a thunderclap. Former loyalists no longer cared about the bank's prestige or history. They only saw betrayal, humiliation, and a toxic culture that had been laid bare. The numbers leaked within hours, billions pulled in deposits overnight, and with every update, the storm grew. Richard Palmer, once the unshakable face of the bank's success, appeared on television the next morning, his suit pressed, his voice rehearsed. But his apology was brittle, stripped of sincerity by the sheer weight of public fury. He called it a miscommunication, a regrettable incident, his words carefully chosen to soften the blow. Yet each phrase rang hollow, drowned out by the chorus of critics who labeled him complicit. Social media mocked his statement within minutes, slicing it apart with screenshots, memes, and scathing commentary. To the world, Palmer was not a misunderstood leader. He was the emblem of everything Danielle had stood against. For Victoria Crane, the downfall was swifter, more personal. Her name trended with hashtags like #CraneCollapse and #ResignVictoria. Within 24 hours, she stepped down in disgrace, issuing a short statement about reassessing her career path. But the damage was permanent. The footage of her accusing Danielle of fraud, her voice trembling with misplaced authority, was etched into the collective memory of the internet. Once celebrated as a rising star in finance, Victoria was now reduced to a cautionary tale, proof that prejudice disguised as professionalism could destroy a career in an instant. The guards who had laid hands on Danielle fared no better. Though the bank tried to suspend them quietly, their faces had already been immortalized online. They became unwilling symbols of blind enforcement, their names and photos plastered across news stories, shared in viral threads dissecting systemic racism and abuse of authority. Each time their image appeared beside Danielle's composed face, the contrast was damning. Meanwhile, Hayes Capital stood untouched, its reputation skyrocketing. Danielle's phone lines lit up with calls from major institutions, banks, investment groups, global enterprises, all desperate to host the $900 million she had pulled from Westbridge. But Danielle did not rush to reinvest. She held back, letting the lesson sink in. To her, the money was not simply capital. It was leverage, a tool to expose values, or the lack thereof, in those who sought her partnership. And now, the world knew what kind of character she demanded. When the reporters finally caught up with her, microphones thrust forward and questions hurled from every angle, Danielle remained exactly as she had been inside that boardroom, steady, unshaken, poised. Cameras captured her calm smile, her voice measured and precise as she delivered the words that would echo far beyond that moment. "Silence is not weakness," she told them. "Calm is not surrender. True power is steady, undeniable, and it doesn't need to roar. It simply walks away and leaves the guilty to answer for themselves." Her words spread as quickly as the video itself, replayed at rallies, quoted in editorials, and stitched into the feeds of millions who saw in her a reflection of something greater, dignity armed with unshakable self-respect. And so Danielle Hayes walked away from Westbridge Bank, not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in triumph. She left behind more than a failed deal. She left behind a ruined institution, a toppled reputation, and the echo of her example. Her walkout was no mere exit. It was a legacy in motion, a testament that prejudice could humiliate but never diminish, that arrogance could wound but never conquer. Westbridge Bank would rebuild in time, perhaps, but it would never erase the stain of that day. Danielle's name, however, had already moved beyond the bank, beyond the deal, etched into the story of justice, respect, and dignity, a story the world would not soon forget.